Yeah, so a couple more people are trickling in, but we might as well start pretty soon here. And we'd like to welcome all of you to this talk tonight. And hopefully it will be a talk that will kind of shine some new light on some topics for us and for you too. And I was joking with Richard this afternoon because we do our monthly talks, and then in between times we think, well, what should we do next? And I kind of say, oh, Richard, what do you want to do next? And he avoids me and we don't come up with a topic. And so then I come up with these topics that are then the day arrives when we're supposed to do this, and we're like, why did we bite off this chunk? Because
we're in over our heads.
We're in over our heads. Yeah. At the same time, this idea of Soma and psychedelics and yoga is a very, very timely thing right now, for many reasons. And it's something that, we've thought about for many years, and something that, we have sort of looked at from different perspectives for many years, because there is this parallel in some ways between what can happen spontaneously through yoga practice and what can happen through taking substances. And we're going to explore what was meant by Soma or Homa, and what we
and all the other substances.
And so how does that all interface, and does that, what does that inform us of in terms of yoga practitioners? So, and I thought I would start with one story about my life, which is, Richard and I Richard's in his 70s, I'm in my 70th year, turning into 70, which means that we were alive in the 60s, which, if you've read any
ancient
history, that the 60s was the time when, in the United States at least, when psychedelics were really experimented with in all kinds of different ways, from the, hippie culture to some of the interesting research that was done by our dear friend Joan Halifax and her husband at the time, Stanislav Grof, working with LSD and people who were dying. And so, you find these old people like us around, and you think, oh, they lived through the 60s, and that must have been this wild and crazy time. And what's interesting to me is that for me, I didn't ever get into experimenting with psychedelics at that time. And the reason was because it was new and, to my awareness. And also it was incredibly, the PR campaign against anything to do with LSD or psilocybin or anything like that was started by President Nixon, the campaign against some of this, in spite of the fact that there had been a lot of research through the Defense Department with some of these substances. The campaign that sort of was put out there was that there was this war on drugs, and in particular with psychedelics, that if you took psychedelics, the message that was put out there was your children would have webbed feet like a duck. Their toes would be webbed. And being the gullible one that I am, I thought, oh my God, why risk that? Of course, now I've talked to our son about that, and he said, oh, that would have been an advantage to have webbed feet, but at the time it didn't make sense to me. And I realized, maybe, I always knew that was one of the real reasons that I was so skeptical. I bought the idea that our government was putting out there about it, which is interesting that I did. I was one of the people who did. But they put that out there, I believe, because at that very same time, there was this drug called formaldehyde that had been given to women who were pregnant. And the unfortunate unseen side effect was that there were birth defects, deformities, strange looking and partially formed arms or feet or legs or hands. And so to say about psychedelics that they will do something along those lines had an element of belief to it that I think, or at least subconsciously, that had an element of belief to it. And, watching some of the antics of people who are sort of making decisions about what is legal, what is not, how to control cultures, I can imagine that might have even been a conscious decision to put that message out there, which doesn't mean much at all, but it's fascinating to me.
Very deliberate,
that
I
it
think.
seemed deliberate.
Right. Because the whole anti-war movement was being propelled by people who were turned on,
Yeah,
so to speak, all over.
yeah,
It was all over the world.
all over the world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
except for me. I was the one out of it. Poor me. And that's okay. I can catch up on things. Richard, on the other hand.
Oh. No, I was already interested in philosophy and Eastern thought from the time I was 13, just because I was lucky to have read certain poets and philosophers. But it was actually in, I don't know, 66 or 67.
Recording in progress.
Oh, we're
Sorry.
recording.
Yeah.
Good.
I skipped my part by mistake.
Anyway, I was blessed to take a significant quantity of probably very pure LSD in a place called Alice's Restaurant. And after about half an hour in this crazy environment, I thought, oh, this is like, I was started to completely perceive my body and the restaurant in deep patterns of interconnectedness, we would say. And so I thought maybe it's time to go because the restaurant was, kind of distracting. So I stood up to leave, and when I stood up, I passed out, cold on the floor of Alice's Restaurant. And and that was, the basic way I've reacted to these things. And it was quite educational to just, go back to actually my sister's place and just feel supported and breathe.
Yeah.
And then in college, I was, of course, exposed to it. And actually, the first yoga class I taught, I don't know if it was the first yoga, but I taught a yoga class in 1968, in which everyone in the class dropped acid.
On purpose?
Yes.
You never
It's
told
very
me
important.
this before.
I didn't. No, of course. We always want people to know, because then it's like, oh, then they step back and they start looking. Wow, look at that. It's not. I don't think it's ethical to spring it on someone secretly, which is what the military tried to do.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and so we did that, and then everyone would do a couple of postures, and then they would lie down in the corpse pose, and we would read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And we would go through all the different bardos, and actually it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
This was before the sticky mats. And
Yeah. And so part of what we run into is what are these states? What is the history of them? What is the history globally? And currently, as I'm sure you're all aware of, there is this sort of renaissance of awareness of the healing and intuitive benefits that can be achieved through intelligent use of some psychedelics. And Michael Pollan, when he finally wrote his book, I forget the name of it, but it's a very general book about the topic, but he also was someone who had never tried any of this and then did and realized, wow, there is something to this. And as yoga practitioners, people say, oh, well, can we just do that part? That part's fun rather than the work that you have to do in a yoga class. And are they at all similar and parallel, or are they not? So that's what we're going to explore in the second part of this. But partly what we wanted to do, because the movement now in many parts of the world is to really look closely at indigenous cultures, some of the use of things like ayahuasca and other, mushrooms and cactus that are that have been used for a long, long time, and sort of look at what is the impact now with them, and to think about the notion that there is intelligence, possibly with intelligent use of some of this, and there is also danger. And teasing it apart in a community and being able to speak of it openly is quite important. And so back in the day, like around 800 BCE, is that what it was?
Oh, what do they call it? The axiom?
Oh, this was a theory I had too.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that in the axial age, which was around that time, yeah, that was a period in the history of the world where philosophical ideas, kind of deeper thinking, was happening all over the place. In Greece and in India and in China and all over the globe, these great thinkers were spontaneously kind of cropping up and having very interesting and almost parallel thoughts going on, looking at them in different ways. And that's recorded history. And there is, in some ways, this belief these days that we're in some sort of global shift of consciousness. And some people, like Ken Wilber, kind of think it's this consciousness that is going to a higher consciousness. I tend to think of it more as this potential for communication that will open consciousness to a sense of spaciousness. And so in this day and age, injecting intelligent understanding of substances that help the mind to let go of habitual patterning is an interesting thought. But in that, thinking about what Soma was and how that has been sort of like investigated, I thought it would be interesting to hear about that.
Yeah. So, Soma is the magic drink that is became the nectar of immortality that was used in the Vedic fire sacrifice. Okay, and there are many Vedic fire sacrifices, but there was a particular one for in which the ingestion of Soma, and this was, if you read the early Vedas, the Rig Veda, and then the Samaveda, which takes verses out of it, it describes, this quite complex and quite powerful sacrifice ceremony. And so it became very much part of the Orthodox Vedic culture, because most of the mantras that were taken during the Homa sacrifice, in which the priests and then different participants, and sometimes the participants would be drinking the Soma, and sometimes they were in training, and sometimes they already had it, and they were just getting a little inspiration from the thing. And so the most musical part of the Orthodox Vedic practice was the Soma sacrifice. And the priests would sing beautifully these mantras. It was very musical and very mathematical. And they would go on and on, sometimes for, 2 or 3 days. And they didn't seem to get tired because they were all excited. And so that says something about, what the ingredients might have been. But to this day, as you look at the different verses describing it, people are not really sure what it was. And back in the day, of this axial age, I suspect a number of people weren't quite sure what the ancient Soma was that was used. And so so it appears that in all different areas of, India and what is now Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then over into Iran or Persia, there were different climates and probably different herbs that were available. And so there have been many, many theories over the past 400 years. Many scholars have become obsessed with this topic, and they seem to go into the same circles, meaning they get so far, but they don't have, they're not sure exactly what the ingredients were that make Soma. And a lot of people are quite excited.
What are some of the things they think it is?
Well, there was the big theory that it was Amanita muscaria mushrooms, which tend to grow in northern climates, like in Boulder. If you go up in the mountains, there's these big mushrooms with red caps, but their effect is quite intense. In other words, you won't be like singing songs and things. Although that mushroom is used, in many places, that theory was gently discarded, that it must have been something else. And so there's the speculation that in different parts, the priests would discover different combinations of plants that they knew about in order to produce this effect. But it's really hard to say. And then the word, so Soma is the Vedic term, but you have to realize that this was a time when cultures were actually starting to communicate with each other. And so you also have early Buddhist schools, and then you have early Jain schools, and then early philosophical schools like Sankhya, which all yoga people know about. And that was also not Vedic. And so, and there were people, a lot of the practitioners would live in the forests and knew how to survive. And so people knew their herbs very well. And so what's fascinating is if you travel west from ancient India and you get to Persia, which is now Iran, they had, the Homa, which seems to be almost identical to the Soma, in that they would conduct these rather elegant and complex sacrifices, and they would chant, and it was also something that the priests who did it were very cautious with. So once a priest, who is something like a very fine chef, would figure out, and this is all speculation, not that they existed, but that they would start mixing things to get that which would tend to have the effect. That they would conduct these sacrifices, and this hit its what was crescendo with with the Zoroastrian or the Zartoshi, who was a prophet, and he wrote the Avesta, or he compiled all of the already existing formulas and sacrifices into that, and that became the Avesta, which was this rather profound collection of chants. And the language, the Avesta Pahlavi Farsi, is very, very close to pre-Vedic Sanskrit. Okay. In fact, you can just trace the roots of the words. So Soma and Homa are interesting. And so, but that was actually happening around 1500 before the Common Era. So it was a time, but then all of a sudden, and no one knows why, it stopped. And that's when it seemed that there was a migration from ancient Iran, largely to the east, and that they moved into the Indus Valley, and but there was and there's a wonderful theory that I'm interested in. There was a volcano that went off in Greece. What was the name of that volcano?
Pompeii.
Pompeii? Yeah, anyway, that was so powerful that it actually destroyed the ecosystem. And so, then the early Zoroastrian people started to travel. So they were not making an aggressive invasion of India, and because their languages had ancient roots together, and so there was a kind of, at that time, a cultural fusing or exchange, which was fascinating. And so it's quite interesting. And I remember, and then people today are thinking, well, what was it? And so the descriptions in the Avesta in Iran, that the Soma was this reed, and it was like perhaps like a tree, and it had leaves and roots and flowers, which is quite different than a mushroom. And and one story that keeps coming to mind, when I lived there, which is one thing that made me very interested in that, and at the time, officially, the Zoroastrian religion was because it wasn't Islam, it was kind of like mostly underground, even though, and wonderfully, there are many, many ancient Zoroastrian temples for the fire sacrifice that have been preserved as historical sites. And they're all made of course, they're in higher places generally, hilltops are the best place if you're going to make a lot of smoke and do a fire sacrifice. And they're made of stone, so they're quite easy to preserve. But I remember people, I would meet there, and they would want to know, where are you from? And I learned that if I said I was from San Francisco, people were like, wow, that's cool. If I said I was from the United States, they were like, because they weren't sure of the political strings and the connections that might be. So I would at least say I was from San Francisco. And then at a certain point, I would say I was a darvish, meaning a monk, or a the whirling, people call them dervishes. I was a darvish, a Hind. So and there were, from the time of Alexander, darvishes or ascetics, not necessarily monks, but people who would wander and take part in the Soma or the Homa rituals. And I was that's where I was from. And they would look at me and then I would say, I am not this body, or this mind. And then I would, in Farsi, and then I would say, and the common thing I learned to say, that since I've learned has interest, I would say, man ru hastam, ru. And so I have since learned that there's a Syrian rue, which is an intoxicating plant that is used in that region for ever since before recorded history.
And it's used as a dye, isn't it? I think in carpets, which is an interesting, the flying carpet idea.
Yeah, so people are start eating their carpets. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think the important thing that you're talking about that really is important in terms of yoga and psychedelics and Soma is this idea of these substances that might open parts of the mind that we might have resistance to opening or might not be in a circumstance that sort of allows them to open.
Yeah.
And yet the ritual associated with it was seemingly almost as important as
Often.
the opening of the mind as well.
Yeah. And there are, of course, exceptions where people weren't sure which cult they belonged to, whether they were Orthodox Brahmins or maybe they were Buddhists or something. But what happened was that it was very much an obsession in the mythology. And so there was a distinction that was drawn between doing the sacrifice, because sacrifice was the big thing. You'd sacrifice, you'd just give something. And it was considered an essential part of human life was to sacrifice, that everything is actually giving, participating in the environment. But it also became identified by the people who officiated. So the priests who had the secret recipes, whatever they were, they also had tremendous advantage because people would seek them out. And they would also make, the bakshish, they would make good. Part of the sacrifice was to set some money aside for the priests, of course. And so it became a bit of a thing in which people said, oh, I just need to do the Soma fire sacrifice, and then I will be happy, or I will become rich. And so the mythology is that the gods, starting with Indra, who was the chief of the gods, they would do the sacrifices themselves and so they would do the Homa sacrifice because they were part of the ritual. And then if it was successful, if they got the right mix or something, the gods would then take off to heaven and they would leave behind some residue, which was the planet Earth, which was, and so all of these sacrifices, which are overly formulaic, in which the person ends up seeking something, even salvation, heaven, knowledge, or something for themselves, would leave a residue. And so the poets of the Vedic poets, Rig Veda, were very much aware of this. And so they would talk about different ways of correcting the deficiency in the sacrifice so that the residue, or that which is that the ego wants to leave behind, like this terrible impermanent world, they would take you through these teachings in order to make the Soma sacrifice more powerful. And so a good example is in the Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna says, oh, the Vedas, if you follow the Vedic Soma sacrifice, then you go to heaven. But then you'll stay there for, perhaps many, many cycles, or hundreds of thousands, or maybe, of even cycles of the universe. You can stay there. But after a while, you've just had a good time in heaven, not dealing with the complex, mystical world of the earth, but you're just kind of having a good time, or a party person, which some of, the Soma people were party people. Then you would come back and take birth again, and then you'd have to start over. And so what would happen is that the gods would do the Soma sacrifice, and then they would take off, and they would go ha ha ha, and they would leave behind this and that this residue was in charge by Prajapati, who was the leader, and he became non-different from Shiva, who was also in charge of the residue. And so what then happened was, the Gita says, oh, that kind of sacrifice, but then what the Gita was teaching was a higher form of sacrifice, in which the one making a sacrifice didn't want anything. They didn't have desire or anger, and therefore they were just acting as a bodhisattva, literally. They were doing sacrifice for the benefit of others. And that you could actually learn this, and this is how the yoga and the tantra evolved mythologically. And so of course what was left over in this, because if you're sacrificing, you want to put down everything and give everything to other beings. But if you're doing it out of a motivation, which is selfish at all, you're not really perceiving other beings. You're kind of like not wanting to deal with them. And so you're not dealing with your shadow side. You're not dealing with your relationships with all beings, which, if you're selfish, are probably a little bit manipulative. And so a lot of the early gods had that problem. And so you come back, and you then have to go through perhaps the same Soma sacrifice, but you do it yogically, in which you'd have to clear out the heart and deal with dropping literally as in the Yoga Sutra or in Hatha Yoga or Tantric Yoga, you'd have to drop down to earth through all of the emotions of the body into the pelvic floor. And so this is where the esoteric Kundalini comes from, the middle path, and this is what the more advanced Soma sacrifice became. And in the Mahabharata, the poet Vyas was well aware of this pattern. So he kept, he was way into dogs in a lot of the stories, and because dogs represent something to the orthodox fundamentalist, or impure, yuck. Just like cremation ash is impure, which is what Shiva smears his body with. Just like, what would I say? Bodily fluids are considered impure. And so a lot of the orthodox, they don't want to deal with other people and the dirty parts of life. And they don't want to deal with not knowing. They don't want to deal with shraddha, or what the mind is actually doing. And so that's
so
the
these
beauty of
substances really allow the priests to get over some of those blockages, or they also could, as you were saying, turn the priests into some people who became a little greedy. And this is the same thing that, when we run into questions from students, like where do psychedelics fit in with a yoga practice, or do they? it's an important question to ask. And and one of the things that has been very telling in our teaching over the last 20, 30 years, one of the things that we've watched is misuse of substances and confusion of different kinds of substances and the value of what they may be contributing. Because the one of the things that happens when you do have these spontaneous moments of, if you want to call them a mystical moment or an awakening that happen sometimes spontaneously through our yoga practices, is that they happen often when we have shown up deeply, authentically, truly, and we've dived into the material and the whatever the practice is, a pranayama practice or an asana practice or a meditation practice. We've gone in deeply and set ourselves aside, not even consciously. It has happened, when it happens spontaneously, that's when that kind of mystical moment can happen. And if you are seeking those experiences through yoga itself, they never seem to come. The people who are striving, it's very hard for those moments to authentically arise. And a similar thing is it's a temptation to just, well, I can just take this substance and then I don't even have to do the work. And so that's this fine line that we really wanted to explore a little bit here. The fact that, how are some of these mind states similar, and how are they different, and how how do we look at them as ways of becoming more grounded, more real, more communicative, and more desiring to do service for others, to see the connection that we have to others. And one of the things that many people, like shamans and people who've really worked carefully, modern day people you might run into who continue to work with very clear rituals and practices where it's not a joke, it's not a party that you're going to experience some of these things. There is this feeling that these substances in nature are part of our way of actually communicating with nature, with our past, with our minds, within ourselves, and that things like cactus or mushrooms in particular, they really, if you approach them as with respect, they have a very different impact than if you sort of say, hey, let's go out and party and do this, or let's go take this. And as much as it's an interesting thing to take something and then do a yoga class, it can become, and to study the Book of the Dead, that's a really cool idea, and it can go off the rails so easily.
Right. As soon as the sneaky ego, which has to do with the very structure of mind, does its natural thing and says, oh, look at that, isn't that wonderful? And you start taking selfies of yourself, with no self. And it's a very subtle thing to watch, but it all boils down to how do you really see the world and how do you see other beings. And so this is why even in substances that are not soma, but like bong or hashish or something, are also part of the culture. And people will actually take them And oftentimes then they'll just chant all night or do the mantra and so it's always comes down to are you interested enough to continue to inquire and to study and to communicate into these subjects. So even if there's and of course in other cultures or in India also, alcohol is considered a sacred thing, and of course we know that might in certain contexts be useful for certain people, and in other contexts it's going to be a disaster. And so what is it that allows us to use it to become more compassionate and to see ourselves in others and others in ourselves? And so that's the kind of the mystery. And
Yeah, and it takes a lot of self-honesty to, I think, and I come from the conservative side of things where I haven't been a person who's experimented with a lot of these things. And yet I have an incredible respect for the process of opening up that is possible, and the process of healing that is made possible. And I have an incredible amount of curiosity about how could we, as practitioners, as modern day seekers, how could we support one another in finding ways that are sustainable to explore within ourselves the complexities of difficulties and habitual patterning and traumas and stresses that we've experienced, so that we not only can heal, but that we can be of service. And that idea of when you look at the way many indigenous practitioners who are shamans are presenting these rituals, or I suspect also in the olden days, that was really what was important, is how is this of service? How is this showing us this visceral sense of interconnectedness? And then as yoga practitioners, the truth that we experience within ourselves as to, well, is this the only way to achieve it through yoga? Is it a cheat to not have to do the work and take some sort of external substance and then you have some of this taste? Or the other way around, is...
if you take the substance, then you are eager to get to work.
Yeah.
And because this is the basic, you're eager to, because the sacrifice is to give to others. And so and if it can improve that ability to give, then that's exciting.
And the insights.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is the physiology. If someone is tasting, the Soma, tasting the nectar, which comes from the root of the palate, which is like Kachari Mudra, then as they start to do that, they are dropping prana all the way down to the pelvic floor. And so then they literally, the physiology is, I'm tasting the nectar. Mm-hmm. And so then you have the nectar channel, and this is the teaching of the tantras and the hatha yoga. And so that's quite fascinating that you can train in that same physiological experience of the prana being this vibration of clear light. Like, wow, this is like the immediate world is this prana. And it's usually, if the ego gets in there and you become ritualized or reduce it to something, then you're missing out on the residue, which is the actual losing yourself in the wonderful vibration of what would be called the prana, the spanda shakti, the clear light, the rigpa, all of that is being missed, all with this clinging to some sort of thing. And so you can actually train and train and train, and then with that experience you say, wow, this is fascinating, and I love being a beginner, because even if I look at this historically and linguistically and culturally, it's like, wow, it's much more amazing than I had thought it to be.
Yeah. And I think also, there's this sort of sophomoric way of thinking about psychedelics and drugs and mushrooms and all these things that are becoming more and more part of our culture again. And to watch that when that happens, if you're becoming interested in them, because it's sort of tantalizing to sort of think about these things, but then to also really look at what is your motive in doing yoga. What is your motive in pursuing some sort of experience that might be a psychedelic experience? And, what is your motive when you are finished doing yoga? And when you have finished doing this experimentation or this ritualized use of something. And so keeping the yoga itself as a sacred thing.
As a way of seeing, because oftentimes you will finish, your trip or your yoga practice, and your mind will come up with some amazingly materialistic conclusion. And if you see your mind doing that, if you get mad, if you don't, part of the yoga is to see, oh, what a ego trip that is, or what a demonic fantasy, and without getting mad at it. Because the dualistic approach, I get mad at myself for getting mad at myself. Okay. And so it's the ability to actually see what you're seeing, which is a lot of the time, the creation of the mind, but without being, just to see it, rather than to, and occasionally you'll run off with it, for at least 5 or 10 minutes or 5 or 10 lifetimes or eons or something. And then you go, I see that. And that's the physiology of the practice.
And I think that part of what these days is becoming something people are experimenting with in the medical fields as well as just sort of out in the streets, but is having tastes of some of these experiences through yoga, through substances that they might have taken too, and then looking at the use of microdosing, in other words, to stop some of the typical patterning that one's own mind or emotion or physiology tends to just sort of go to automatically. So that the bottom line for this that we're talking about is what we are hoping as we do practices is as maybe we do sort of ritualistic or sacrificial practices as well, that we wake up more rather than check out
more, that we not separate ourselves from what is right there before us, but that we become deeply and intimately part of it, and it becomes deeply and intimately part of us, so that we really are living and breathing the sense of interconnectedness, which is what yoga is really all about. And what, from my perspective, from probably your perspective, that's what I can take to my deathbed with me, is this sense that there is this profound connection between me and the bug sunning itself on the window outdoors, and that is that level of understanding of connectedness is what we do these practices for. Because with that level of understanding, what automatically becomes part of our physiology is a spaciousness inside. It's this tenderness in the heart.
It's a sense of satisfaction that is free of like accomplishment even, because it's just so sweet. Yeah, and it's not really you. It's not the sense that it's not you, but it's not. You all these definitions of who I am. Am I a leader? Am I a successful, influencer? Or am I a god? Am I Indra? Am I am I the Buddha? Or am I? It doesn't matter. This is much sweeter than any of that, and it's also back at what we'd say point zero, or like, wow, this is fascinating, and I think we got to these are great tools, and they're tools that actually I'm sure have helped the evolution of human culture, and at a certain point eventually helped the communications between different cultures. And so they're tools, but they're not like, good tools. You have to use them.
And sharpen them and take care of them. Take them out of the rain when it starts raining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like the internet. That's a big tool.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. And so really, I don't know that we, answered what we set out to answer, which is, are you dropping in or copping out? And I don't think there is an answer for that. I think that in terms of where we are in the world today, there is this resurgence of mind-altering substances. And sometimes there is a place for that. And sometimes those things can become incredibly, they can really, even though one might be having insights, they take you off on a path that prevents you from being really deeply here right now. And so I think that, for all of us in this age where these practices that we're doing are meeting the more sort of availability of things like different psychedelic substances, that it's a really important time to be careful and to be truthful and to be in community so that you can get feedback and listen to the feedback that you get, so that maybe you had such a good experience taking such and such that you don't want to hear that, oh yeah, and you were such an idiot when you were doing that and you hurt some people. Then you don't want to hear that, and to not take these things lightly, but also not to be a pill about them. So it's like this real opportunity to be real, to be authentic, and to be curious. So,
Yeah. I was thinking of, there's another substance which it's called, well, it depends on where you're from. Some people call it coffee. Others call it tea. And these are actually very profound substances that tend to now link the world together into these two cults. And some people will do both, tea and then coffee. But imagine civilization. What would life be like without that? It would be interesting. And so there's a chant. I don't know if we've done it online before, but it's in which it's to the 5 pranas, and the 5 pranas are, of course, the prana that lives in your heart, rising up and expanding, and then its beloved, the apana, which flows down, its base is the pelvic floor, and the two are actually psychologically, they tend to, or in movement, we tend not to unite them. They're like night and day. But in yoga, we pour one into the other in a sacrifice, even using the term Johomi, I pour this nectar into its beloved. And so it's a bit of an imagination ritual. But then you go to the other pranas of the body, all of which are intense, deep, historical vibrations that have everything to do with what story or ideas the mind is manifesting. You can go back into the immediate prana, which would be the chakranadi system, or represented by the chakranadi system. So
there's prana,
prana, apana. And those are the most important. And then vyana, which is in your skin, which is the sense of proprioception. And so every point in the skin is considered to be the center of the universe. And if you awaken, so it's like you pour this nectar in the Homa, you pour the Soma all over your body, you take a bath in it, and then you have this real sense of proprioception. Like, wow. And this has to do with how the mind is able to go from here to there freely in order to play dialectically with all the pranas. And so it's like every center, every pore of your skin is a holy spot.
And then there's Uddana.
Uddana is from the heart through the crown of the head. It is ut, or upwards. And this, I call this intrinsic dignity, but it also has to do with listening. The throat, its chakra is the throat, and so Ganesha's ears open. And it just allows you to give space to things, Uddana. And so if you have that a sense of intrinsic dignity, you don't need anything from the outside. Someone to tell you that you're cool, or someone to tell you that you're an idiot, or someone to give you a thumbs up on, what was that old Facebook that ceased to exist a couple of days ago? Yeah, that was delightful. and so that's very profound. And then the Uddana, and then once you have that, you can keep it in your heart, the prana, drop it to your navel, and then mulabandha, or you pull the apana up the middle path, back and up, and they join, and then you get a Ganesh belly, and that's the Samanavayu, and that's what is, and what's happening is that they're all the time, the mind is playing back and forth. So sometimes you might just sit down and you'll get a sense of the Ganesh belly and the pelvic floor, or you might get the dignified posture, or you might just, I love that exhale. And then you want to go get the beloved of the exhale, the inhale, and say, look, and they're so happy. And this is the almost circular sacrifice.
This is a very beautiful chant.
So the first one, Om Shradhayam Prane Nivishtamritam Juhomi. So Juhomi is when you're pouring this Nivishtamrita, which is this nectar, which is from the moon, but it's well prepared. In other words, it's like, for some of us, it would be an espresso. For others, it could be, a nice tea.
Bulletproof coffee.
Yeah, or instant coffee.
Yeah.
But it's all
7-Eleven
but you
coffee.
have that. But the flavor is should be something that when you get the flavor in your mouth, you go and it makes you focus your mind through that sense that good food or good nectar can have. And so then you offer that, and then you go Shradhayam Apane to the Nivishtamritam Juhomi. I'm pouring this nectar from the moon into the apana, and then you'll feel the pelvic floor is now blessed, and the apana is like, oh, here I am. Where is my beloved prana? Because what we're learning is that they manifest simultaneously rather than one or the other. And this will open up the central channel. This is esoteric yoga. And then, now that you've got your pubic bone and coccyx both dropping, prana drops the pubic bone, apana drops the coccyx. The next one is, Shradhayam. It's Udana. Oh, Vyana.
Yeah.
Shradhayam Vyane, which is in your skin. And so and there are a lot of rituals in which one will actually pour nectar in some of the fire sacrifice ceremonies. They'll pour it over your top of your head, or they'll send you down to a holy river to bathe. But I like pouring really best good quality espresso. And it could be a latte, but you have to have other drugs to balance that. Okay. And so it's like, woo, then your skin is vibrant. And the sense of proprioception, which is divine. So all of the levels of mind, even ego, is a divine function. And then, Uddana. Shradhayam, Uddhane, Shradhayam, Uddhane, Nivishtam, Ritam, Juhomi. And that opens the nectar channel, and the nectar channel makes your tongue, because it's listening, your tongue becomes very wide, and it merges with the palate. And as it merges with the palate merges with the perineum, which is the pelvic floor, which is why a lot of people think yoga is disgusting, because basically you're actually, in your experience, you have put the apana, which is full of residue. Residue is all the stuff that's left over in the Orthodox sacrifice that they can't deal with. You have the residue in your mouth. Okay, and so that's a whole nother study right there. And then finally, Shradhaya gung samhane nivishtam ritam juhomi. And then samanavayu. And that's the Ganesh belly, or that's the same when after one sacrifice, all that was the residue from the gods running off to heaven and leaving the earth was this serpent in the causal ocean. And this serpent, who is, as we know, formed a sofa for Vishnu to lie on. So Vishnu lies back and does his yoga nidra, and the serpent, which is apana pattern, or Patanjali, opens the cobra hoodies, manifests the tail of the full awakened apana. And so the heart of that is then the prana, who is Vishnu, and they're just like, Vishnu is like, and out of his navel grows a lotus stem, and on the end of it is a flower opens, a beautiful flower, in which Brahma is sitting there, having no idea, he can't see Vishnu, and so he thinks, wow, here I am. And so the universe starts again. And so in mythology, this happens every, gazillion years, but in our own yoga practice, it might be happening every few seconds if you're there for it.
Could you do the chant just one time through?
Oh, without messing it up?
I love it, but just because it's such a nice ending.
Hey, Richard and Mary, can you also, someone is asking the name of the chant. Can you type it into the chat on Zoom so that people know the name of it, if you don't mind?
I'll try to type it in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go for it, and then we'll have a few questions afterwards, so I'll type it in then.
Om Pran Shraddha. So Shraddha is your religious faith, or your trust. And so, but if you cannot say what it is that you have faith in, then that could be really nice yoga. Yeah. Okay. But if you reduce it to an idea, then you might have this whole ego problem that the gods have. So, Shraddhayam prane nivishtam ritam juhomi. Shraddhayam apane nivishtam ritam juhomi. Shraddhayam vyane nivishtam ritam juhomi. Shraddhayam uddhane nivishtam ritam juhomi. Shraddhayagam samane nivishtam ritam juhomi. Brahmani atmamrita tvaya. So you give it all to Brahman, which remains unimaginable, inexpressible, only it's everything. It's delightful. It's
And
emptiness
that's
itself.
the spirit of yoga practice. That's the spirit of these sacrificial uses of Soma. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
So that chant.
And
What's
the ancient
meaning of that
Soma,
chant?
in fact, were the origin of so much of these practices.
Well, thank you
Okay,
all for joining us this evening, and we hope that we shed some light on some of these topics for you, and that we encourage all of you to be in touch if you have questions about this or anything else. Please do, and we'll, in the meantime, come up with some other new topic for next time. But it's great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you
Bye,
so
Tracy.
much.